Let's move on to sketch-based elements. A sketch-based element is an element that requires a user-defined sketch to show Revit the shape of the element you wish to create. In other words, there's no reasonable way that Revit can assume the default shape of objects like floors, roofs, or stairs. We must give Revit some guidance when creating such elements by sketching out the overall shape of the element. Sketches are two-dimensional, simplified renditions of the element you're creating, and in this movie we're going to look at the floor element as our first example. So I'm here in a simple office building layout. The name of this file is Adding Floors, and I'm looking at level 1. On the Home tab, I click the Floor tool, and this takes me into sketch mode. Now, how do I know I'm in sketch mode? The most obvious way that I know is that the entire model grays out. Now, I can't modify any of the other objects in sketch mode. You'll see that some of the tools have grayed out. If you went over to the Home tab, you wouldn't be able to add walls or doors or windows. So really the only active tab is your Modify, Create Boundary tab, and you're limited to creating things that have to do with the floor's boundary shape. So let's go ahead and begin laying out our boundary. The default behavior puts the boundary line active as the active tool, and also in the toolbox over here has Pick Walls as an active tool. Now we can draw our floor with any of these other shapes, and we've seen those shapes before in other commands, but Pick Walls is probably our most convenient way to create our floor sketch because most of the time you want your floors to match the shape of the existing walls. So it works pretty simply. I just click on an existing wall and this purple sketch line will appear. Now I can click on several walls if I like, and each one will add a new sketch line. Before I get too far though, I'd like to point out to you this checkbox right here on the options bar, Extend into Wall Core. Now what this does, let me go ahead and zoom in down here. This places the sketch line on either the inside or outside face of the core boundary of the wall rather than the wall itself. Now if you had that unchecked, I'm going to uncheck this box and I'm going to click this wall over here. You can see that the boundary line would actually go to either the outside face of the wall or I could flip it to the inside face of the wall. Now I'm going to press Ctrl Z to undo that. I'm going to click the Modify tool and I'm going to select this sketch line. It's on the inside face of the core. I have a little flip grip and I could flip it to the outside face of the core. And if I zoom in really close, you can kind of see that there's still a little bit of space here at the top of the wall. That's actually the thickness of the drywall. So this sketch line is either on the inside or the outside face of the core, and you can do that to get the floor to interact with the structure of the wall. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out. I'm going to make sure that Extend into Core is still selected. Turn on my boundary line again, pick walls, and I'm going to keep going. Now I'm going to stop here for a sec because this wall is actually in two pieces, here and here, and this sketch line does not go all the way across. Rather than give myself a second sketch line here, I'm going to skip over that segment, complete the sketch around here, and then I'll just simply use my trim tool to clean this up. Now we saw trim before in the context of walls. It works exactly the same way here. Now one last thing to point out about the sketch before we move on is this symbol right here. The very first sketch line we drew has that symbol, and that's the span direction symbol. That just indicates the direction of the floor joists for this particular floor slab we're building. If I wanted the span direction to go in some other direction, I could click the span direction tool and I could pick a different line, and that would put the floor joists over on that line. This is a new feature in Revit 2011. It's a handy way to indicate to your structural engineers which way you want the structure to go, if that's important to you in your design. Next, we're going to click the big green checkbox over here. That's your Finish Mode button, and that will complete the floor. And before it can complete, Revit has a question for us. So the question it's asking us is, any walls that go up to the bottom surface of this floor, would we like those walls to actually stop there and attach to the bottom? Now, sometimes that's a very desirable thing to do, and in fact, in the next floor we draw, we are going to do that. But in this one, I'm going to actually say no, because the walls they were talking about were actually the perimeter foundation walls that go around the building, and I don't want those to stop at the floor. I want them to continue doing what they were doing. Now, verify over here. I've set this file up so that we're creating just a simple generic 12-inch floor structure. There are other choices in here, just like we have with walls. And so you could do just a concrete slab or a slab that has finished material like VCT on it. For now, we're going to stick with just the generic 12-inch floor. Just wanted to point out to you that you can use some of those other styles in your own projects. Now I'm going to jump up to level 2, and I'm going to go back to the Home tab, click the floor again, and back to boundary line, pick walls. It all does it by default. Here's extend into core. Click the wrong wall. Select that one. And it looks like it went to the inside of the core, so I'm going to flip that to the outside before I continue. I don't want to do this wall and this wall because we actually have a double height space in here. So I'm just going to go to trim for that and kind of get those two sketch lines to complete one another. And then I'll notice here that I got a little problem getting over to the stairs. So what I want to point out to you here is, I'm going to go back to boundary line. This is where you might use some of these other shapes. So you're not required to use pick walls, it's just that that's a convenient way to work. But when you have a custom shaped floor that you can't really base on existing walls, then you simply go in and sketch it. So I'll just sketch it here with a couple extra lines. Click my modify tool to complete that, and use my trim to clean it up. Now you have to clean up the whole sketch. If you leave any gaps or if you have any overlapping lines like I have right here, and you try and click finish, Revit will complain, it will throw an error message, and you'll have to do something about it before you can continue. So I'm going to click continue here, dismiss that error message, finish trimming, go ahead and click modify, and then I'll click finish. Now I'm going to see the same message again that I saw a moment ago. This time the walls that go up to the floor's bottom are these walls here. So the same layout of offices that I see here on the second floor occurs on the first floor. And so it's asking me about the version of those on the first floor. Do I want those to attach to the bottom of the floor? This time I'm going to say yes. And then this next message is a little easier to understand because it's actually highlighting the geometry in question. And so what it's saying here is the horizontal floor is intersecting the vertical walls. And would I like the horizontal floor to actually come in and carve out the geometry of the walls that they intersect? And I'm also going to say yes. Now, how would I see the effect of both of these changes that I've made? I'm going to go up to my quick access toolbar, and I'm going to click on the section tool, and I'm just going to simply cut a section. Anytime you want to get a better look at your model, cutting a section is a great way to do that. It's just 2 simple clicks. You deselect it by clicking anywhere, and then double click it, and you've opened the section. And just like that, you've got instant feedback about what that object in question is actually doing, in this case, the floor. So let me zoom in this area right here, and let's talk about what those settings were that we were just looking at. Here we told it no, we don't want the wall to stop at the floor. If we did, this wall would actually have come down and stopped right here, and we'd have a gap in there. Here we told it yes, we want it to carve out, and yes, we want this wall to stop here. So depending on the situation you have, you can either choose yes or no to either of those questions. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out. And so that gives you a quick overview of how you can create floors. But keep in mind some of the techniques we use there in terms of picking objects and sketching objects and the different things in sketch mode, because we're going to see that theme running again and again throughout all the movies in this chapter, because all the movies in this chapter deal with sketch-based objects.